All right, here we are. We are live, streaming to YouTube and Facebook, and it is with great pleasure. I am here with Tarik Rever again, and we get to chit chat with you guys. I hope everybody is having a good time, and especially folks in Texas. I hope things have improved, and stay warm, take care of one another, do what you can to look out for one another. You don't deserve the kind of weather that we're used to up here in Ohio. I mean, your houses down there are not built for it, that's for sure.
Yeah, we underestimated the level of the freeze as we put it, but yeah, that was something else. It's still like some lingering with it, but yeah, we're doing pretty much better than we were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we've got snow up here and it was down to 5, but we're pretty used to things going below 0. We're not Canada, but we get cold winters, but our houses are also built differently, so
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So how are you?
Oh, I mean, for the most part I'm doing much better. Doing this whole freeze thing, it was sort of like a little bit worrisome because some of my medications, luckily I got some of my medications right before it happened, but when my myasthenia gravis, when stress sort of hits me, it escalates my autoimmune system, and so I was like kind of wiped out. I keep falling asleep, but couldn't stay awake, So, but as the things stabilized in the climate, so did me. So did I. So.
Well, you had texted a little bit ago going, so what do we want to talk about? And I was thinking about names and identity and like the different things that we both choose and have chosen for us in terms of how we identify as just kind of a place to start and then let folks pop in and ask questions from there. I wanted to start actually with names because I know everybody knows me as Michelle Belanger. But if you're in my Patreon or if you're in my gaming group or if you're in my like tight crew of people, you'll also hear the name Zosh, which is started off as a nickname and started off as a gaming name and turned into like an alternate name that I am just as comfortable with. And you'll probably hear Illyria refer to me as Zosh much more than Michelle. And it's not that either is invalidated by the other. Big believer that we choose, we get to choose our names. We have at least one chosen for us, and we may like it or we may hate it, but we get to figure out like what do we call ourselves.
Right, exactly.
It led me to wonder, is Tarik your given name or is it a chosen name? Are you comfortable sharing that?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely comfortable sharing that, and it is my given name. Well, my first name Tarik is my given name. Like Rever, I go by that. That was I sort of adopted that because it in French is dream, and dreams are synonymous with like everything about me. So like it was just sort of like almost a given. And if I dabbled with different names, like it was Tarik Balan, Tarik de la Morte. A little dramatic, but
Oh, you know what? We're goths. We're allowed to be a little bit tutu.
But yeah, Tarik Rever was better.
A pen name I used actually Lamore. A pen name I used back in the Shadow Dance days in the 90s was Tasha Lamaru. So I totally get the whole like gother than thou.
Oh yeah. I mean everything that I think that accentuates our society within an umbrella of Gothic. And there's so many facets of what that really means, but fashion wise, like like what I'm wearing now, I probably have to say why I'm wearing this because as some people don't realize, because myasthenia gravis, it's I have like extreme muscle weakness, and I had to sit up against the wall here in this pillow to help support me, my vertebrae. But this is an exoskeleton that's sort of like fabricated together different parts and things of that nature. And so, but it also looks like something I would wear anyways. Yeah. Very Borg-like, because Actually, it's interesting that you recently made a post about what like top five. I can't remember all of the top five. What top five sci-fi characters do you identify with?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like an angel. I was like Lyria, and I was like the Borg, and and I said Data from Star Trek,
Mm-hmm.
and then I said the android from Dark Matter. So I saw like a pattern. I was like, man, I really identify with synthetic life forms.
Very transhuman.
Yeah,
Yeah. I can see that. I mean, simultaneously, there's that sense of being an outsider, but also being something that like chooses to define the limits of your own humanity, like how fully you want to engage with being human. As something like, especially the android from Dark Matter, like that really stood out with me. Is
interesting.
she starts off as this just sort of, I don't know, service bot sort of feel, but as you get the depths of her character, she is outside of humanity, incredibly insightful about humanity, and gets to choose exactly how human she wants to be, and can kind of turn that on and off. Like is almost a shamanic identity where like she moves between the two different realms of identity. So I think that's a pretty neat concept for where we want to go with identity, because identity isn't static, right? We don't pick one identity and have to wear it for the rest of our lives. We can
Exactly.
choose to be something different. Circumstances can change. Things in our bodies can change. Being able-bodied or being disabled are parts of identity. And we may wake up one day and find that that's changed. And then we have to adapt. Like, how much do we make that a part of our identity? What do we do with it? How much do we allow it to define us? How much do we present to the world?
And it's an interesting thing because I love tech talks, and sometimes like I'll just work on a computer and I'll play a TED talk, and and then they'll just kind of go into this cycle of one TED talk after another. And earlier today, I wish I can remember the name of the person, but basically they were saying like this guy was asking someone how they like to present themselves, and they were like saying, oh, they're of this race, they're a woman, or they're this religion, they're this job, like in that order. And so you can kind of see what they prioritize within the order they had said it out loud. And so it's the little things like that a lot of times we don't think about or even take for granted, like how we perceive ourselves. And I think identity, when you said identity, I was like, man, that's really the core of almost everything, because when you see identity, we're contrasting ourselves to something else, even objects. A lot of times we project personalities onto objects, or though someone will call their car a name or a nickname or something, or their favorite bat, they'll call, if they play baseball, they'll give their bat a name. So we're always projecting identity onto other things because that's how we assume the world is seen through our own eyes, which is interesting about the human condition.
Yeah, there's a comic book artist who has made the point that pretty much if you put anything that reasonably looks like eyes and a little bit of a mouth on anything, like humans will project a personality to it, like the simplest, boil down, like the simplest sort of thing. And that's how you end up creating like all of these different characters and getting people to relate to it and sort of project themselves on it. We see mirrors everywhere. We just don't always recognize them as mirrors.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that growing up, it was kind of surreal because like I like to see we don't say it out loud all the times, but we like to see ourselves in movies because you're trying to identify with something, and the character doesn't necessarily have to look just like you or anything, but you want it to connect. Just like that list we're talking about, you want to connect to a character, and there are so many characters I really love. Like my favorite movie of all time is The Crow. Brandon Lee. Brandon Lee is The Crow. And there was a character called Razor, who was like the female crow in the comics, graphic novels. And I actually like, even though like my heart is with the Crow and Brandon Lee as the Crow, and how he made that character manifest on the screen, But the female character, I was like, I always wanted to see a movie where the female crow was on a motorcycle with like a black broadsword, scraping it against the ground, like driving through the streets, like, you know, nighttime in Detroit or something. Like, oh my god, I love to see that, you know, like so much, you know, because it would be a smaller body frame, seemingly unsuspecting, like, you know, smaller stature physically, but have more of a ferocity, you know, like, and more, and that's what I identify with more, you know. I wanted to see that more, you know. So it's like things like, you know, wasn't really processing to really got older, but yeah, like I'm kind of like split almost right in the middle, like, you know. Did you watch what was it, Torchwood?
Yeah.
That's cool. I'm
No, there
huge
was
in Doctor
some
Who.
fun things there. Yeah. No, I've
Oh,
been
there
watching Doctor
was.
Who. I've been watching Doctor Who since it was on PBS. I think I was 12 the first time I saw it. I was just like stumbling through things. It was Peter Davison as the Doctor. He was my first Doctor.
Yeah, I thought when I was younger, and I used to watch Doctor Who, like the first Doctor Who, it'd be like Kung Fu Theater, like, you know, type movies coming in, and then like be like cartoons, like in that order almost, you know. But yeah, but like later on, like now we have Torchwood, which was the extension of it. I wish they continued that, you know, with limited series, I believe. But
Yeah, no, I really like what they did with Captain Jack.
and it pops up every, you know, here or there and stuff, even afterwards. But if you notice, one of the episodes, there was at least one, maybe two episodes, where there was like a being of undefinable sexual identity, or at least the energy part of it was, and it would basically be attracted to anything intellectually that stimulated it, you know. And I thought that was really evolved, and that was a beautiful concept, for them to sort of translate that from real world, to sci-fi. And I think sci-fi has always been synonymous with people that of like different sort of alternative lifestyles, you know, because even though people think that's like a subgenre, it really isn't. I mean, not everybody's obvious, you know. Like I look pretty freaking obvious. Like I was like, oh, this person probably has some masculine and feminine like overlap going on here. Like, yeah, you can see that. you know, you know,
Don't be shy about it. Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the average person, you know, does, they might not physically present themselves. Like I think recently, Lady Gaga and a friend of hers said they're non-binary, and Lady Gaga, even though she just or they just very fantastical. Whenever Gaga is going to the red carpet, it's normally in dresses, but I think it's the spirit
Yeah.
that Gaga's talking about, you know.
Well, and you raise a good point with like Torchwood and sci-fi and seeing ourselves in characters, like the media we consume, the books, the stories, the comic books, like we put our identities together from a very early age based on what we see out in the world and what resonates with us. And you know, there's an early process where you kind of like adapt that and like but you see something that you like in the crow and you start dressing like the
Yes.
crow. You know, cosplay and, you know, sometimes just adapting it as part of your style and your thing. For me, it was Phantom of the Opera pretty early on, and
Oh wow.
a more obscure Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough had a book series with Saint Germain, and he was this like 4,000, 5,000-year-old vampire. And most of his ideas and attitudes resonated with me. I was reading her stuff when I was like 14 and 15, and like a bunch of that like were little elements that I pulled in from that and was like, okay, I like the way he looks at the world. I'm gonna try to be a little bit like that.
I'm gonna ask you a question in a second.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
What do you have you been watching? A Discovery of Witches?
I haven't yet. I've been in full-on hermit mode recently, so like just hanging out, avoiding every kind of social media and stuff. So like this is me slowly getting back into being social. I've heard good stuff
I really
about it though.
appreciate that. I really appreciate you doing this, by the way. I wanted to be on the record and say that, you know, to be in this format with you is an honor, and I really appreciate you just doing this. Seriously.
It's a fun conversation, and we get to share it with people. We've got a question if people want to ask questions on the subject. I'm cool with people asking questions. Please, like, if it's identity, if it's gender, if you want to ask us what we ate for lunch, I'm open to pretty much whatever.
Yeah, I'm looking through the chats. There's some amazing
Yeah.
like statements here. A few questions.
Willowcrow's got a really good one. Any thoughts on identity in terms of finding community, but not feeling like you completely fit the definition of what makes up the people of that community? Does it make sense? That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that does make sense.
I did a horror convention this weekend, an online one, and one of the panels we did was on the occult and paganism and whatnot. And it was like, 6 of us all just chatting about our experiences with that. And many of us got into magic and the occult. The first place we started was Wicca or witchcraft, like early paganism. And one of the reasons that I ended up kind of forging and defining my own path was, I found the witchcraft community in the early 90s, and it just wasn't perfect. It wasn't a good fit. There were some things that were right, and then there were some things where I stuck out like a sore thumb, especially with back then, like the witchcraft stuff was very much light and life and very like, let's go out and hug trees. And I have nothing against hugging trees, but I am not a fun in the sun, like hang out and like do circle dances in, the summer solstice. Like that doesn't work for me at all on a whole bunch of levels. I was too dark and I was too broody, and I was just not quite what they were looking for when they used the word witch, which is why to this day, even though I practice magic, I don't use the term witch. Although I acknowledge that by the current definition of witch or witchcraft, I probably still fit. I do magic, I do plenty of stuff, but for me, where I came to that community, I felt like an outsider, even though I felt like there was more connection there than I say with, my Catholic church growing up. There was more connection there than with, say, the jocks, but it still wasn't a perfect fit. I think some of us may find that there are multiple communities that we connect to but never fully fit into. Like we exist in the place of the overlap. And a lot of our society maybe tells us that we need to fit in. And I think that there's an additional identity of the traveler, of the between walker, the person who is able to be here and be there, but also move between them and not always be like completely sucked in. I don't know. And I just want to toss the whole thought, all those thoughts to you.
No, you definitely are hitting a nail on the head there, because this is how something like, shows like, Discovery Witches or anything within the supernatural genre, or the show Supernatural, for example. There are some exceptions within the like Legacies, shows like that, the originals. But basically, generally speaking, I think people portray sometimes the screen does reflect a certain mindset, and you do see people identify with, in some cases, either or. They're either a witch, or either a vampire, they're either Therian or otherkin, or some form, and I think energy is energy, and sometimes people can be multiple hybrids of different things, or almost like a chimera hybrid of sorts, and so I think that when it for it to be shown, for that to be accepted more, people verbalize that. Like, say for example, I'll say this real quick. Say for example, like there's a vampire in a show or movie, and there's like witches within the movie or something like that, and one witch like becomes a vampire, then that witch normally loses all her or his or their witch abilities and are just vampires. Like, that wouldn't make any sense. Like,
no, real life doesn't work that way. Like, if you take on a new identity, you don't lose the old one. You just choose how and when you present them. Yeah, that's a really, really good point, because I've run across that where that sense of needing to find where you belong. So many of us kind of get the sense that there's only one place and there's only one identity, and that you're somehow only allowed one special identity. I know that, like, I grew up with that. Like, if you were a vampire, but also a witch, but also a goth, but also, you know, non-binary, but also, like, you started to, like, load up all of these things. You were being too extra and too special, and, like, somehow you didn't have a right to be all of those things. You had to pick one. Like so much of my young adulthood, people were telling me pick one. You know, from gender, from identity, from everything. And I don't think we need to pick one. It's not, so much of our society pushes us toward black and white, pushes us toward polarities and binaries, that it's either or, when the real fabric of both identity and the world is gray. And more than gray, it is multicolored and multi-textured and multi-layered, and there's so many different aspects to it that, yes, if we're talking, we sometimes have to narrow things to, like, just one subject for the duration of, say, a conversation. If I'm engaging with you about, like, how vampires work, I'm going to be speaking to you from mainly my identity as a vampire, but that doesn't remove my experience as anything else. And yeah, giving ourselves permission to occupy multiple spaces.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just, oh, so Victoria, being someone whose identity has completely changed, how do you process your past? I know it's unwise to just cover it up, but it gets to a point where it feels so separate, it's almost alien. I think sometimes thinking of even this life right now in terms of living multiple lives, sometimes we can go through such a change in identity that it's like we are a different person. And to pretend that that previous self doesn't exist, to somehow cut that out and bury it, doesn't serve us. But to recognize that we are now somebody completely different, or very significantly different. So choosing a different name, going through a ritual to kind of acknowledge a rebirth or a transformation. I'm pretty sure the butterfly remembers being a caterpillar, but can't really relate to what that was like while it is flying. What do you think?
Well, I'm just processing just on different levels. That's actually a surprisingly profound question, because it similarly seems like simple, like, you know, like, like, yeah, like, you know, the person you present yourself in the past versus how you are now. But on the typical way of seeing that, I want to address that first real quick. Like, so, like, I used to be physically, like, muscle bound. I was like 180 pounds of muscle. I'm only 5'8", you know, and I was like, you know, it was like extremely dense. Like, it wasn't like a body fat index. It was super low body fat, you know. So, and I was like really diligent at doing that. But sometimes when I was in that physical state, I felt like I was like lying to part of myself. And when I'm like thinner, then I'm lying to the other part of myself. And that's like, I wish I can just like Hulk out like a Hulk and then go back to a smaller frame, like on and off like a switch. But it's like, no, you had to work out for like months to have that size. And you had to, and it take months to lose that size. You couldn't just like go back and forth when you wanted. It was super frustrating, you know. And like, you know how Facebook shows like, you know, an anniversary of a picture that you posted there, and every year I'll see a picture of myself, like holding like a picture of myself, and I can't even post. I can't even show you. It's just like hard for me to look at me as that. I like, you can't even recognize me. I mean, my neck was this big, my huge jaw. I was so huge, you know, and like in a way it looks cool, you know, like, but only for like a fraction of, I would say like 20% of the time, like that looks cool to me. The rest of the time I couldn't be that, you know. And so but a tiny piece of me misses it, like a small piece of me misses it, you know, but not enough to really want that, you know. And even if I don't even have the choice because of my disability. That's another thing that did, like, the disadvantage of having a myasthenia gravis is like, for me, I can't keep on weight at all. I weigh like 115 pounds. I'm tiny. I'm like super tiny. You can't tell. I think because I have a big head, you know. Like, but like the rest of me is
to
real
me, you look
small.
like very, very not frail, but very gracefully like live.
I appreciate it. Maybe it's
Yeah,
my bone
you still have
structure.
you still have the dancer's physique, the dancer's build.
I appreciate that. Maybe if I was taller, it'd be more, it'd be more obvious. But yeah, I still have a small frame, and so because of myasthenia gravis (MG), it made a decision for me, and so
Mm-hmm.
it just helped me sort of like accept the smaller frame. Like, okay, well, I guess that's what it is.
Yeah.
But going to like so past lives, this is the thing I wanted to bring up. So in past lives, another reason why I go by non-binary for me is because like not only because I fully embrace masculine and feminine, and sometimes I lean more into feminine, but there's still a definite masculine component there somewhere. But when you go into like past lives, I feel like I've been a mother. I feel I've been in Egypt. I was male in a royal family, so to speak. Multiple different versions. Native American. In Ireland, I feel like I was a farmer, like a very simple life, a different lives. And so a part of me remembers a piece of every one of those, not completely, but enough to where like
Mm-hmm.
it still has a major hold of who I am and what I see myself as, and I see myself as all of them. And there is an underlying consistency, even though there's a difference in personality and different life events. Some part of each part of them still feels like me in a weird way, but because I still have those different impressions or echoes of those different lives overlapping, I definitely can't say like I'm this or that. Like so them to me feels like almost like my own version of Legion. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah. No,
like for
I completely relate to that because I do think that my both my belief in and my experience of past lives and past life memories helps to inform my attitude on identity because I've worn many different faces and shapes and colors and identities, jobs and all of it, different nationalities, different roles, and it having a different one doesn't make the previous one invalid. It just gives me a new experience. And I carry forward aspects of all of them and perspectives from all of them. Um, some of the past life recall, the memory work stuff that I do within Peru, there's this thing called aspecting, where you're not only just like trying to get some of the memories, like you're pulling that personality, that self forward in order to either dialogue with who you were and the lessons you learned, or in some cases, something as simple as pull forward a memory of how to do something, how to make something. I do a lot of that when I'm working on the kapet, the incense that I make that's like 3,000 to 4,000 years old,
yes,
and it doesn't it doesn't make Michelle go away, and it doesn't stop me from existing here and now. It's just making room for another perspective and holding space for that. And I think those experiences, that ability to sort of like shift the faceted gem of identity, and recognizing that all of these different facets are part of a whole, and just because I put one facet forward doesn't make any of them disappear. They're just sort of, not necessarily in frontal vision. They're all part of the same thing, though. I see, modern approaches to identity moving in that direction, realizing that we are a lot of things. We occupy a lot of spaces. We have full rights to many different terms for ourselves, as many as we are able to incorporate and contextualize. And we shouldn't be limiting ourselves or allowing others to limit us and saying, no, you can't explore that. No, you can't try that. No, you can't wear that. You can be, actually explore the vast richness of who and what you are, because what you are is as infinite as the universe.
yes. Which I think overlaps what Robin Clark is asking or saying. You see
Oh
it?
yeah. Oh yes, I do. Okay. First of all, thank you for the kind words. How would someone overcome abuse and shunning within the trans community for not being masc or femme enough or switching between? I think we're still doing that process. I know one of the reasons that I didn't, in the same way that I avoided the witchcraft community, or like dip my foot in and kind of like step back and going, not for me right now. The trans community early on was not where I felt comfortable fitting either, as someone who's intersex. I mean, by every technical definition, since I was assigned female medically at birth, I'm technically trans. If that's a definition of someone who is biologically like like when biological sex gets into a like whole thorniness I don't want to deal with, but my chromosomes are X and Y, and we know that there were things done medically to make me be female so that they could put an F on my birth certificate and make it simple. So by that definition, technically trans, and yet, like you, Tarik, I like the luxury of being able to move back and forth between. And although I have what I perceive to be more masculine qualities than feminine qualities, at the same time, I like to be able to dress up in a dress once in a while and look fabulous. And if you've seen any of the old stuff that I used to do with Ern and whatnot, or the early pictures from the vampire community, like I can rock it if I want to.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with it within the communities when they kind of get entrenched in that binary? I don't have an easy answer to that, because I don't know that our communities are. I think our communities are still a work in process.
It's true.
And I think the mainstream culture we're a part of has a significant impact on how those communities identify themselves and create their own boundaries and kind of gatekeep. In a perfect world, like the trans community would be outside of the idea of mainstream concepts of gender. You get to be who you are and what you are. But we live in this culture where we have a very binary, very black and white way of looking at things. And I think for some people, as they are going through the process of coming to understand that they are not what they were told they were at birth, that they almost have to go in a full 180, like go completely in the opposite direction, which means negating this thing they're trying to no longer be, rejecting it completely, pushing away. And if they kept that for their own journey, that might be healthy, debatable. But part of the trauma, I think, is when they're confronted that in somebody else, it gets a strong reaction. It's difficult to see someone who is either not in the same sort of space of just completely rejecting like a female identity in favor of being, uber masculine. I don't know. I don't have an easy answer. Illyria would tell me that people just need to talk more, communicate more about like what they like and who they are,
Yeah.
and what they want and what their boundaries are.
I think communication is key to almost everything.
Yeah.
I think to me, communication is almost like a pure form of chaos, because when you just let things just come out chaotically, then blossoming out of that is actually a strange sense of order, because there is order in chaos. Chaos in its pure state, like fire, seems chaotic at first glance, but then you start seeing that it starts finding its own rhythm, its own flow. So when people communicate, things come out. Like you start realizing actualities of things that you never knew. Like people for years, and then a new side of them comes out. Like, have you seen the movie Soul? From that Disney movie Soul?
Yet, but I've seen bits of it. It looks so good.
It is good. It is good. It's funny too. Like you start to recognize a lot of the voices of like famous comedians. Like, oh my god, what's his name? Richard Adewale. He's in there. I think Taika Waititi is. I'm pretty sure Taika is in there. But basically, I'm not ruin the movie. Don't worry. But basically, some of these questions come up, like in terms of contrast and what it means to live a life and what your identity is. Like, like, does the body that you're in really matter? Like, or should it matter? And I think that's the thing is that science actually proves a lot of things. It's just that some things aren't recognized. Like, for example, in terms of the hemispheres of the traditional sense of a man and a woman, women tend to have higher developed speech parts of the brain, and so when a woman has a stroke, in most cases they can still speak to a certain extent. But when men have a stroke, there's always a higher probability that they'll lose their chance to speak or their ability to speak, or like it'll be like a slurred speech,
like orphasia.
Exactly.
Where like the words get all switched around.
Like,
trying to understand like the neurology, like chemical makeup, like our body and our soul and our identity and our gender and ourselves, like everything is a very, very complicated mix. As someone who's intersex, like it's kind of a constant exploration of like what parts do the things that are expected for this or that. And I mean, medically, it's just a whole lot of question marks for me.
That's the thing. It's like when you medically we try to define what a man or woman is, it's not black and white. It's like several degrees of gray, and so like in the Olympics, in testing athletes, a lot of times there's discrimination. Especially, I noticed more discrimination in the female area, like or like as they present themselves as female. And then they looks like, well, your testosterone levels are too high. You have like X and Y chromosomes, and it gets disqualified. And it's like it's happened.
The difficult thing with that is you can be like by the textbook definition of XX and a menstruating identify female and everything. If you are at your peak athletic performance, it's not uncommon to stop having a period. It's not uncommon to have your hormonal things shift. Like there's a lot of stuff about just the reality of being an athlete. So if we are going to define sex or gender based on one narrow measurement of the hormones, first of all, that's a path of just fuckery because it's different for everybody.
It is.
And people are going to find that they're different from week to week. They're different from month to month based on stress levels, what they ate, how much they exercised. Just there's biology, chemistry is not the answer to identifying gender and sex. And we're barking up the wrong tree with that. I want to just grab Kathy's request here because I'm pretty sure this is directed at me. Both of us. Would either of us mind saying our pronouns? Using she, her, hers, and pronouns for me. I'm intersex and ambidextrous and split down the middle for pretty much everything and go, I'm always, why not both? So honestly, I'm good with all pronouns. And I know I don't say that in a way of like being flippant, but I will answer to she, him, them, whatever, and all of them are fine for me because I feel so completely outside of where pronouns exist, like what pronouns are meant to do, that they're kind of irrelevant. What about you?
Mine's sort of like a complicated answer, but just trying my best to summarize it. So like how I see myself and then other people, it's a little different. So how I see myself, I'll just say just like they and them, and neither he or she, like no, not a he or a she, just they and them, and then it's Tarik. So Tarik, they and them, and for me, it's real simple. Now, how I relate to people and how people see me, it's a little different. Like there's some people I've known for years, and I'll call them brother, and I do feel like that part of me that see like that percentages of masculine will start like growing when they're around me. And then I would see them as a brother, and they see me as a brother, and so in that sense, I would be considered male. In that sense, because that's how it was originally, like a long time ago, and so it's almost like a tethered to that part of my life, But it's not like they have to call me a certain thing or things like that.
Mm.
And then, but in terms of like public and strangers, things of that nature, there's no emotional connection. Is I still see myself as 100% like they and them, like neither, and now in terms of like I guess the closer someone knows me, depending how they are, if they're just like if they knew me now, it's definitely is they and them. If they knew me from before and they slip up and say like he or something like that, I don't get upset or anything because that's I'm like okay whatever. But if they know me now and that's how they make me now, then I would get upset if they
Yeah.
said like he or something. If that makes any sense.
No, it makes perfect sense to me. And I've also noticed like it's different people at different stages of their journey, and some folks like it's always best to ask, because for some people they've either been so forcibly demanded to present a way that wasn't comfortable for them, to misgender them is actually to remind them of that trauma. And then you've got complicated answers like mine, where it's like, what do I look like today? I'm good with that. Zeta, as I've gotten older, I've found that my titles or identity labels have changed as the vocabulary for such things have expanded. Have either of you struggled with finding the right expression of self? Do you want to start with that one? Because there's been so much neat stuff that's changed, especially in a short period of time, 10 years more than any.
Well, I guess I break that down to what self is on like 2 or 3 levels. And I apologize because my answers are always like complicated.
We're complicated people, and I think that's
Yes,
actually why these are interesting conversations, because it's a good demonstration that there's never any simple answer, and no one answer is going to be right for everybody, and I like showing that dynamic.
Like sexually identity. Yeah, vocabulary has changed with because I wouldn't know what to call myself, and that's one reason why I never said anything. I just go by whatever society normally focuses on. But as like time progressed, every 5 to 10 years, there's evolution in titles, and now there's almost a name for everything. And then now that that's like in the sort of like equation, then I feel more myself because there's an actual name for that, and actually sort of invokes more of me within that title, which is kind of cool. Um, in terms of like sexual identity, like how I see myself, Now, in terms of supernaturally speaking, or like on a metaphysical level, just how we said earlier, in terms of like you can be anything because energy is energy is energy. It just depends like what you're really connected to the most, or maybe you can connect to multiple things. So I love energy and adjusting frequencies. And to me, being a witch or someone that does magic, or whatever you want to call it, it's just a matter of like you're using a combination of their own emotion, and the sort of bending this sort of infrastructure of the universe to have like a certain goal, to accomplish a goal, And if you want to call that person a witch, then I don't know if they identify with that at school, but at the very least they're like they're a magical practitioner, and that's definitely what I am. And then someone called me a witch, like technically that's true too. If someone said like, "Oh, I'm like some type of energy vampire," like that's technically true, and that's interesting because that's such a huge, broad word that really doesn't define who someone is. It's like it like saying like, "Oh, you have a human body."
Yeah.
I was like, okay, sure, it doesn't define any level of like how you use that or anything, So because there's so many people that are vampires that don't even know they are, and they just are, And some people that train it, is better to train it. There's some people that train it and they have more of a precise understanding of it, and then there's sort of nuances within that field. But basically, like to summarize what I was saying, I see myself as a hybrid of multiple things, and I think that I will tell you. I'll get back to this why that makes more sense later on, but.
We're in this fascinating period of a really rapid cultural shift.
Yes.
Like these conversations have started to happen. The internet has increased the pace of the conversation. Language evolves like a virus and mutates like a virus to begin with. And one aspect of language is the more we communicate about things, the more we start to create specific terms and jargon and new bits of language. So we're at this point in this revolutionary state where we're having a dialogue about identity and about gender and about sex and about what defines a person as even like, you know, a human, transhuman, like what are we? What do we allow ourselves to be? So we've had this proliferation of terms. When I was coming into like my sense of self and trying to figure out like, okay, am I a boy or a girl? Do I like boys? Do I like girls? At that point, it's very telling. Those were the two choices. You liked girls or you liked boys. Maybe you liked both. And even then, like bisexual was still sort of like a dirty word. So like the gay community was not necessarily, it was weird. Like if you were bi, you didn't fit in either world. So I got, you know, kind of adjusted to that pretty quickly, but you still were expected to identify gender-wise one way or something. So the word that I found in the 90s that fit my identity and my presentation and my sexuality closest was stone butch, which was
Yes.
which was a type of like just dyke who was not necessarily very like physically demonstrative. Like they might be a lover to other people, but they were not someone that let other people touch them much. It was very much, and that went in with like my my kink identity as a dom. But even that didn't quite perfectly fit because it was still like a very, very like masculine, feminine. And I'm like, yeah, I don't, flannel shirts and buzz hair just doesn't quite work for me. And there was still a stereotype that went with it. So where we're at now, instead of stone butch, you have options like asexual, aromantic, gray sexual, where you're mostly not sexually attracted to anything or given towards sexual activities, but circumstances where people may make a difference. We used to call it, let's see, it was bisensual, where like we would have cuddle piles. My favorite time in the 90s, there's actually a terrible book written about it called The Gothic Rainbow. There was this coffee house up in Cleveland, and all of us like artsy bohemian freaks would hang out until they kicked us out. And then we would spill out onto the sidewalks and stay there till 3, 4 in the morning on this terrace, talking philosophy and art and doing energy work, feeding off of one another, and just doing a cuddle pile, drawing on one another. If we had musical instruments, we brought musical instruments. We chalked the wall, like we just took over this space and allowed ourselves to explore. We would have been hippies, but we were all in black.
Right.
So, you know, we were very, very like just artsy goths. And bisensual was, you know, nobody felt bad about anybody cuddling up on anybody, like just hanging back and like giving back rubs, and having words for that now. We didn't have words then, and we almost didn't care enough to push for words. We just were. We just existed in this sort of gray space of it's cool, everybody's cool, nobody has a problem with this. Our interactions are not challenging your identity or, you know, or anything like that.
Right.
So I don't know. I will also admit that as an older Gen X, the proliferation of words is a little overwhelming also. It can be a lot to try to think of like gray sexual, bi, romantic, like just the kind of laundry list that people will come up with. Which is looks like I just came up with some of these,
That's
you know,
what I say.
Have people taken labels too far? Sometimes, or at least, yeah. I mean, I think we can get a little too hung up on the validation that labels give us. Like, especially when somebody is like really at that early stage of trying to find who they are and what they are and looking for validity. they seize on, oh, this word defines me, in the same way that like you seize on a style or a name. And where labels go too far is if you get so hung up on that shiny label being your definition that you don't pause to consider that at some point you could let it go if things changed, or that you could have another one. You could hold more than one in your hands at a time. That you don't have to be, that just because it fit right then doesn't mean that it will always fit. Labels go too far when we turn them into a prison, when our box becomes a prison rather than something convenient to give us an easier way to talk about our experiences to ourselves and to others.
It's true. There's a company, this UK company I'm starting to work with, Evers, and they're trying to basically do T-shirts, and they'll basically have like a certain slogan that's about equality and trying to break certain like molds of society. And I'm like, well, I'm all about that. So sign me up, you know. 'Cause I'm just like break it, you know. And I think that when you remove, that's what someone said. Like, do you think people are taking titles too far? It's like I think titles are more important to the person that titles themselves more than how someone sees another person. You know, because as soon as you commit too much to a title of another person, then you're like saying, okay, this person is only this, and so they deviate just a little bit. Like, oh, you're betraying your title. It's like no, it's like I'm whatever I want to be, man. You know what I mean? So I think titles are great for yourself more than for the other person. That's how I see it.
You know, and to riff off of that, like we have a bad habit just collectively of putting people in boxes and not then being flexible enough to see them as more than just one thing. A good example of that is like Sir Anthony Hopkins, played Hannibal, is an actor, is also an incredibly gifted musician.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't think about him as a musician because they think about him as an actor. And there's so many other people in the public eye the same way, where you get used to them being presented one way, and that becomes kind of a comfort zone. It's a little like the Gilligan Island. If you ever see Gilligan outside of the silly hat and the red shirt, like that familiarity, that habit of identity, right. Like that's Gilligan. The idea that he could be something other than just this goofy thing in specifically the hat and the shirt. But that cultural revolution, that the conversation that we're in right now, we're allowing the possibility that boundaries are not fixed. That nothing in ourselves or in our world is as static, rigid, or defined as maybe we're comfortable with it being. I want to pop into Willow Crow's question here. The vampire community seems to be presenting itself to me a lot lately, and I would never have thought of myself as a vampire, but now I'm starting to wonder, how did you know for yourselves?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was saying.
Yeah. I'm trying to make space for you because I'll talk too much too. I know both of us feel the same way, so I just.
No, I think it's cool. They're both conscious of trying to balance it out. That's cool. It's not always the case with a lot of people. So I appreciate that, and I'm trying to do the same too. So basically, puberty time. Your hormones are shifting every 7 years. Oh, technically every 7 years, your cells are like duplicates of previous cells. And within a time span, on the average. I mean, there are some exceptions, but on average, most vampires, when it hit like, 14, 15, 16, that's when it's like awakening, like something's like unlocking. And some people are later, of course, but it's generally speaking when it's happening. It's because there's so much energy that happens. And if you have a life event, I had several life events leading up to that point that for me created sort of like this, almost like someone was, like it was standing on ice, and it had like a hammer and a chisel, and they're like hitting the ice, and every event that happened was like creating like these cracks. So by the time I had, like I was 15, like it finally went through, and then it opened up because it was enough energy to push through. If that makes any sense. And so part of it was good, part of it was bad, because some of it did come out of a trauma of like, different life events, but some of it came out of something beautiful too, and in terms of my psychic awareness, because being a psychic and being like mentally developed in that sort of perception, it was always the case since birth, always the case. And then when being my sense of perception adjusted, being a vampire, things smell differently, things taste differently, and my perceptions of others dramatically shifted. Sensing, being more empathic of their emotions, because I actually went from sanguine to energy. So I started off sanguine. A little bit later on, when I got a little older, I was more sanguine, and then like eventually shifted to energy. Only because like for energy I felt safer, just from my own personal opinion. But I respect everyone though that's pranic, that's sanguine, that's energy, that's everything. I respect everybody because I've been all of it. But yeah, basically I think it's hard. It's like you feel it in your bones. It's so strong when you awaken. It's like it's undeniable, and that's when putting a name something for yourself really does come. That's one of the good examples of how that is really important, because you hit it like, what am I? What's going on? And I started reading, different books. I studied stuff like Dr. Stephen Kaplan, and his research, and growing up, and then later on, and then in your books, and your discoveries, was like really inspired me too. So thank you for that too. But that's really for me. Is the physical change. Food wasn't enough. I was always hungry. Thanksgiving. Okay, I'll say this real quick, and then it's your turn.
It's good stories.
That's crazy. So in Thanksgiving, I was 14. This is like approaching it. I was 14. I had an entire. That's before I was vegan. I'm vegan now. But then I ate an entire duck, half a cake, half a pan of macaroni and cheese, mashed potatoes, stuffing, two cups of iced tea, two drumsticks. And I remember because it was so weird. That's why I remember everything I ate. And it was like, and this wasn't over. This is like one sitting. This isn't like throughout the day. This is like one sitting. It's like freakishly amount of food, and I was even smaller then as I am now. So people are like, how is this happening? What is going on? And people are like, what is going on here?
That's when family says, do you have a third leg? Where are you putting it? Is your stomach open onto a third dimension? What the heck?
And I was like, I'm still hungry. It's like I can't fill this hole in me. Like it's like, it wasn't right. Like there's something missing. I couldn't place it.
It's interesting as we have this discussion about vampire. Vampire was the one identity that wasn't a question and didn't even. There wasn't a gray area for me. There was no other word but vampire that fit for what I was groping toward. I think maybe because that one was such a clear flashpoint, everything else is just like, it could be this other stuff. But, I was raised in a family where psychic stuff was accepted. It was believed to run in the family line. So we had conversations about psychic perceptions, energy, and ESP and stuff growing up. But of course, psychic vampires were not part of that conversation. And it was much like you, Tarik. It was 12, 13, 14 was when I started to things started to just knock around inside my head and spill out into experiences in the world. And it was clearly something going on that I didn't have context for and I didn't have words for. But I'd been drawn to the identity of the vampire really, really early. I remember inventing vampire tag and playing vampire tag in first grade and convincing the other kids to be my victims. And running around and vampire tag was literally, hi, I'm the vampire. I catch you, I feed off of you. And I look back and I'm a little bit awkward going, oh, I actually was too. Oh, should I look these people up? I hope I didn't traumatize anybody. Shit. But first grade, how do you even know? It's so I can look back and go, I was always this. This was always happening. This was always part of my identity. But then hitting the word and going through that process of, okay, I'm wrestling with this Lost Boys comes out. I didn't even see Lost Boys in the theater because I was so conflicted with the pop culture portrayal of the vampire and the folkloric portrayal of the vampire, and like what this identity seemed to actually be for me, because it was obvious, you know, I wasn't undead. I didn't sleep in a coffin unless it was for a joke. Was definitely more nocturnal. I've always been. I've got like severe sensitivity to light, to sunlight. Some of that might be explained through my early, like my actual health problems, and who knows? I mean, chicken and the egg that. But there's other aspects of it too. Like magically, there is an increase in my awareness and my power and the way I'm connected to things, as the day shifts toward night more than during the day. Like there was a lot of things that just all point toward vampire. And so seizing on that and doing the work of reclaiming it and going, okay, in the same way that folks in the 20s, 30s, and 40s said witches are not just green, warty women who cavort with Satan in the woods. Witches are also people who practice magic. Witches are real people. Witches aren't always evil. They're not a stereotype from the Wizard of Oz. Vampires are also not Dracula. Vampires are not necessarily, vampires are also people, and this is an identity that we can have. So yeah, I struggled with it though, because I mean I was a National Merit Scholar. I was on a full ride scholarship to college. My life plan was to become a professor and just, you know, get my PhD, teach, be that weird, entertaining, quirky professor and write some books, and that was that. But I knew for sure I was not going to get tenure if I was running around saying I was a freaking vampire. So I spent some time trying to go, well, is it all in your head? Like, is this a psychological thing? Like, do you really need to take energy? Like, do you really? And I did a lot of experimenting with it and a lot of like checking in with other people. And it became very clear, like this was one thing I couldn't say, no, I'm not. Like, I don't have a choice in the same way that I don't have a choice to say that I don't have heart problems. Like I had open heart surgery twice. So that's a part of who I am.
Well, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, no, I was born with a heart defect. I was supposed my life expectancy was 5.
Oh wow.
Also, probably why I never experimented with sanguine vampirism, because I've got a lot of medical trauma around blood draws, things like that. So although blood itself does not bother me, all of the ways in which I would be able, or I would need to take it safely, are huge PTSD triggers for me. So I'm just like, nope, not for me. I'm fortunate in the fact that I have a very good facility for taking it through other means.
Yeah, that is definitely a blessing, because a lot of us community don't have that. But I like over time acquired like, you know, other like means that, you know, like energy wise. There was a okay. I mean, everyone believes what they want to believe. If they disagree, I respect that. But there was an instance where it was like 10 years ago, something like that. You know, and I channel, I meditate, and I facilitate different access points. I think the human soul is a nexus to different doorways, different places. And so at one point I was meditating and let myself just sort of surrender to myself, and not let distractions of the world be as they are. Let everything melt away, and I was like just pure at that moment. Just like, you know, no body, just like, you know, no expectation, no judgment within myself, no judgment to myself. And then throughout that, words sort of like sprouted out. My mouth was moving on its own, and with its the words that came out was like something like despite your dismay, there'd be like more power or more energy is all we can say, you know. And then as soon as it happened, all the electricity within a 20 block radius was gone. It was a complete blackout, you know, when that happened, you know. And so that was me showing a scientific stamp, like, okay, that's an example. And so I start tracing the steps, like, because it's good to be a skeptic to an extent when you're trying to prove yourself. Like, it's good to believe, I think, and to embrace who you are, but it's also good to be a little bit of a skeptic because you want enough reoccurrences to say, okay, this is what this is, just so you feel comfortable with it. Just at least for me. And so it's like I need more cases of this happening. And so and then later on, I was at a call center. I used to be a manager at a call center like years ago, and we closed this huge deal. It was like a monumental deal, at the time. And so I got really excited, and I remember I put my fist in the air, and I was like, "Yeah, we did it!" And then when I did it, all the power in the building went out. I was like, "I did it again!" I was like, "Okay, now I'm seeing a pattern here." Okay, even though I knew it, I wanted to know it. And then the third thing happened was that, a lot of different things, but in terms of blowing power out, I couldn't find my wallet for like 3 months. I was kind of freaking out once, and I was like, man, I know no one stole it. It's in this place. It's at home somewhere. And I found it under the couch of all like office places. And I looked everywhere. It was under the couch, And so, and I was like, finally, I did, and I pointed. And I pointed. It was like an apartment at the time. It had a window unit, and I pointed like that. And my view of vision, it was the AC window unit. I did that. Sparks start flying out the AC, caught fire. I was like, oh man! I ran to the AC and unplugged it and had to get
None
replaced.
of this sounds weird to me or extraordinary, because I have a laundry list of similar experiences where stuff where it's like, okay, there's a point where it's no longer coincidence.
Exactly.
When all of your friends are like, oh, could you not? And I'm like, if I could figure out how to like completely control that aspect of it, like things would be different in some aspects of the world. Jim Lucier had asked about the Merovingian. I wanted to quickly answer that.
I saw that, yeah.
That's a whole conversation by itself, but there was, I don't know if they're still active, there was a whole vampire house Quinitar, that was sort of devoted to this idea of the Merovingian witch kings as a kind of not so much the bloodline of the Holy Grail, but a vampiric bloodline. And there was a genetic lineage that they were tracing back to the Merovingians. So there was definitely an aspect to at least one part of the vampire community's mythology where the Merovingians were worked into it. And that was House Quinitar. I missed Victoria's extra question between that. But Sage is asking, what are some resources you can suggest to someone who's realizing that being a vampire is part of their identity? And I don't want to say buy my book. Actually, I don't have to say buy my book. I can say that it's up on Sacred-Texts for free in perpetuity because I gave it to them. Because I believe that information that's useful like that to understanding who you are should be free and available to everybody, because not everybody has the money to go buy a book, because I was there too.
I will say though, if you can buy the books, I just like, but if not, then to download a PDF or something. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, also the updated version, the one that went through Wiser, is significantly expanded and a little bit less heavy-handed with the language. The version that is up on sacred-texts.com is a little bit raw. You were talking about kind of channeling, and how I wrote the Vampire Codex, how I gave myself permission to do that, involved sort of stepping out of my own way and allowing the older, wiser part of me to step through. But the language is very different. It's sort of like this high, sometimes a little bombastic language, but that's why it comes through in a way of writing that's really quite different from a lot of my other stuff. And yes, that was a drive-by by Bliss, who
Yes.
some pets.
Oh.
Let's see. I think this will be the last question from Victoria. What was that point of becoming aware of your vampiric side scary, traumatic for either of you? When I was initially labeled as a vampire, the concept was really hard emotionally. Wasn't sure if it was common. I know I struggled with it. I struggled with a lot of like, is this all in my head? Am I trying to be like just uber goth? Like, do I have a right to this identity? At this point, I'm familiar with that struggle because that idea of, do I have a right to this? Am I legitimately this? I have had a similar struggle with intersex, even though like I've got medical proof that I am. I still have moments where I'm like, but maybe is it? But am I enough? You know, so I think identity, especially when it's very personal to us, comes with a lot of struggle to like really go, no, this is important to me. I think the most important it is, the harder it is to like, the more we struggle with like really integrating it into our identity. At least that's been my experience. What about you, Tarik?
Yeah, that's yeah, like kind of like I was saying earlier in terms of like, getting to a point because I think we all have there's awakenings, but I think there's actually several awakenings.
Yes.
Depending if somebody like replenishes themselves and they're definitely building on and cultivating who they are. I think you can have several series of awakenings, but the first main one was I think came out of built up trauma over a long period of time, and plus I already am psychic, and through my family, I think we're really gifted psychically and dreamers and able to walk certain pathways. And some Native American terminology will say like shadow walkers, where you can like walk to life and death, to like two different planes of existence that normally only spirits can follow, And so a lot of that came out of despair and depression for me, because when you're a teenager, that's a lot of times that's like your height of that, like all that stuff you're going through. It's like a bottleneck of that. So yeah, a lot of trauma came out of that for me. But yeah, like in terms of there's something I wanted to mention earlier. This goes through earlier.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just say this quick. I'll try my best. So earlier I was talking about, this ties into everything. So in terms of them and identity, right? And whether it be sexual identity, metaphysically or supernaturally speaking, and like I say, I'm a hybrid of different things. Uh, so this body or our bodies or this shell, that we shed this, moral coil, so to speak. It really is a shell, and so my energy sort of wanes a lot, to put it politely. End of the day, in terms of I mentioned earlier, it really does connect to everything, to strokes. Every day, it's like I have a stroke. It's not an actual stroke where it's like a blood clot in my brain, but my entire left side turns off, like in the morning and at nighttime, that's why it's so, to me, like an amazing thing to even talk right now, at all. Like most of the day I can talk, but the more energy I use, if I get stressed out, automatically like it starts tightening up here, and then like my eyelid starts closing, and then just it starts like going like that, and I can't say anything, And so more than that, my whole side turns off, and to me it's almost like rigor mortis. It feels like part of me is just dead, Like to me, like I literally feel like half alive and half dead. That's how I feel. I'm not saying that medically how it is, although we'll say,
but truly a walker between, yeah,
like literally between. And then even at the doctors, they'll like the last time I went to the doctor before the pandemic, and their assistant nurse tried to take my blood pressure, and like my body just like had no resistance. It wasn't giving them anything. They're like, man, you're like your blood pressure. It's like they couldn't even feel it because you have to have resistance in your body. And my body just kept like sinking into itself because there's no muscle density practically, and my blood, my heartbeat, everything's like real slow. Everything's real slow. They're like, man, you're barely coming up in our meter. Like, is he alive? Or that's what they were saying to me, And I was like, well, I'm alive, obviously, It's like, well, they're like, don't worry, you're not dead. I mean, you always have a heartbeat, but yeah, like for me, it's like everything's like real slow, like everything's real, like I'm alive, but I'm definitely have one foot in another realm. I would put it that way. So that being said, one time I was asleep, and then when I dream, I do more than dream. I saw a pond. There was like water lilies. It was beautiful, and it had these huge leaves, size of enough to fit a person. And then without, it's not words, but it felt like words when I speak it out loud. But it's not a way humans can speak. It's through words, unless you're psychically interacting.
Mm-hmm.
And in the dream, psychically, it was saying to me, jump on it. Jump on the water that's in the leaf. So I jumped on the water that's in the leaf, but there was no ripples.
Mm-hmm.
But the ripples that would have been there went into me, and I felt like a vibration go through me, and it shot me into the sky, to the air, and then went over the clouds. And then I landed on this adobe platform, and standing there were like these representations of like avatars of every major mythological part, like Native American, Indian, Greek, Europe, African, Egyptian, like these like types of like deities, to put it politely, or angelic.
Mm-hmm.
Some might say these are angels, some might say these are deities. It was like one and the same, and they're like welcome, look around, but don't look up just yet. And I was like, okay, and I was like, try not to look up. And they showed me like a projection. It's like, this is how we see humanity. That's what they said. And it was a dust cloud or a sandstorm, I should say, a sandstorm with hollowed out faces screaming. I was like, that's how you see humanity, like this parasitic eaters of matter. He's like, yes. I was like, what? I was like, what? I have to disagree to some extent, although I do understand that humans are not treating this world the way it deserves. And I definitely see why you could be upset about that, considering that you spent so much time cultivating your crops.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just poisoning everything indiscriminately, And so I definitely can see why you're upset with that. But at the same time, I see beauty in the world too. So there's some beauty there, but I understand the frustrations. So I know I can see where they're coming from. So they're like, okay, now you can look up. I was like, okay, and I looked up and I saw 7 different colors. I didn't realize the importance of this till later. 7 different colors, and I went to each one and I picked them up and I looked around, and all I could see was forever of one color, and an emotion tied to each color, and like sort of a journey tied to each color, And I was like, well, that's amazing. It was almost scary because it was like infinite. I can see the infinite of that color. And then the last one I went to, and it was just white, and it was like nothing there, no matter, no anything. It was just white. And I went to the last one, and the gravity of it was immense. And I went up there, but it wasn't. The other ones I felt like I was by myself, but this one I wasn't by myself. It was something there, and psychically, it said, "Thank you." And I was like, "Thank you." Like I'm glad I'm here. And it said, instead of looking up like before, it said look down. It goes look down. I was like, I look down. It's like, and it was like Earth, the world, and this voice. It was not a he or a she. It's just a voice or a feeling that was like a voice, and it basically goes, this is how I see my children, and I know that things didn't go as planned. I was like, okay, I was like, I know. I was like, and it goes, but I still have faith that things can work out. And people are obsessed with dying to reach heaven, but it was intended that there can be a paradise on earth if people basically not want what the other person has, to not nurture envy, to basically help each other. And that was it. It was like there was no I mean, I respect if someone has a religion, that's a religion, but basically it was trying to say that how people put too much stake into one way of thinking, and they try to dictate other people's lives by my religion is better, your religion sucks, or my way of living is better, your way of living sucks. It was supposed to be just like this, help people around you if they need help, and they'll do the same to you. And from that is paradise, and you don't have to die to reach that. You can just be cool. It was so simple. And I was like, I agree with you too, and I share that feeling, and so that was a good feeling. And then he says, "Oh, you need to go back to your body now. If you wait any longer, you'll die." And I was like, "Oh, I need to go back to," because right before that happened, this is the end of it. Right before it happened, I felt this sense of like amazing bliss, weightlessness, and the infinite stretching out and being one with everything. It's like, oh, you need to go back to your body now, because like that was like me like dissolving into it.
Just starting to let go.
Yeah.
So I mentioned I've got a degree in comparative religious studies, and my undergrad work was on shamanism, and I have had this comment cut out of every single documentary I've done on vampires in the vampire community ever. I believe firmly, as someone who's got a background in studying like shamanic traditions around the world, that most of the folks who identify as vampires in our culture right now would very easily fall under the term of shaman, or at least shamanic experience, in the sense of being called to this identity as walkers between, as beings that sort of move between life and death, who trance out and transcend easily, who travel easily, who move between the different worlds, who often occupy physical identities that are liminal as well, who are healers energetically and are wounded healers, which was a key thing about shamanic identity kind of across cultures, where the shaman learned to heal by being wounded and having to heal themselves first. And usually that was a wound that they were having to heal forever. They were always taking energy or feeding themselves to keep themselves going in order to maintain physical existence.
Yes.
There's many different aspects. I wrote a paper on it. Got a lot of flack for, weirdly got a lot of flack for it from the vampire community, because they were not keen on that metaphysical take at the time. And I don't want to make it an appropriative thing. Like, I'm not saying like shamans from this culture or that culture or that culture, but if you do a cross-cultural study of what we identify as shamanic practice around the world, there's elements that I think we are spontaneously tapping into.
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
think that it makes us, a shaman of a particular tradition. I think that it means that we are mystically called to change ourselves, to change the world, to exist in this liminal space, and perhaps be ambassadors between the living and the dead, spirit and matter, and heaven and earth.
I definitely agree with that.
All right. And I think that gives us a good place to stop at. Lear has given me that, and my cat at this point has been like, why are you still talking?
Well, these amazing conversations, and it's like it doesn't happen every day, and so I feel like I'm being spoiled. So I'm like, yes.
Thank you for sharing all of the intense stuff and the journeys and all the bits that come from that. Thank you.